About a year ago, I made a video about Onward, Downpour Interactive's excellent VR milsim that was, and still is, among the best titles you can play with a VR headset. Since that time, Onward's grown substantially. Downpour Interactive's added new maps and weapons that emphasize different tactics and add new dynamics to the multiplayer that weren't there before. When I made my first video, I said Onward was rudimentary and simplistic. It doesn't blow you away with a bunch of complex mechanics or stunning visuals. Instead, it takes those simplistic mechanics and fully fleshes them out. This is mostly still true, but while still in Steam's early access, Onward's new additions have extended gameplay enough to make my older video outdated, and for as much as I love this game, that wasn't something I could let slide. As I said, on a fundamental level, Onward is packaged in gameplay tropes that, if you're a fan of realistic shooters, you've seen before. Limited health that usually depletes after one shot, no HUD, and no floating icons designating friend from foe. Teams are limited to 5 players, making shootouts more intimate, and death a major setback. A tablet on your back shows teammate and objective locations as well as a satellite view of the current map and how much time is left in a round, but even then, especially from a distance and at night, telling friend from foe is tough. The two teams, Marsoc and Volk, use separate equipment and have distinct silhouettes, Marsoc with smaller ballistic helmets and Volk larger, bulkier combat helmets. The best teams and players constantly communicate and check their tablet in order to avoid friendly fire and call out enemy positions. It's definitely tricky at first, at least it was for me, but the more you play and learn, the easier it gets. Outside of that tablet, however, Onward prides itself in immersion, in forcing you to make sound tactical decisions based on extremely limited information, while using VR's inherent dynamics in such a way that can only exist in VR. You have to press and hold a radio on your shoulder to talk with teammates who are far away, pull the pin on grenades before throwing them, and pull the bolt on a sniper rifle up and back and then forward and down between shots. You can set your tablet on the ground or a table next to you rather than constantly grabbing it from behind your back to check up on teammates, and checking remaining ammo or equipment requires you keep middle notes and physically look at your vest to grab whatever you need. Because headsets like the Oculus Rift and HTC Vive use a pair of internal monitors, one for each eye, when aiming, I find it's best to leave both eyes open rather than closing my off eye. Keeping both eyes open while aiming takes some getting used to, but gives you a real advantage. It leaves you with your full peripheral vision rather than limiting your vision to a single eye. It's this combination of VR's natural ability to immerse and Onward's commitment to realism that make it one of the finest VR titles on the market. Weapons reload and sound differently and realistically. For weapons that don't automatically eject magazines, you have to press and hold the weapon's release, grab the old magazine with your free hand, drop it, grab a new magazine, and insert it into the weapon. If your old magazine was empty, you'll have to chamber around by pulling back the bolt, and you'll have to grab the bolt where it actually is located on the weapon. One detail I didn't notice until recently was that when a round begins, most weapons start with a bullet already in the chamber. So with weapons like the AK-12 that has a 30-round magazine, you can replace the magazine at the beginning of a game with a fresh one, giving you 31 shots. It may not affect gameplay all that much, but it's an impressive and realistic detail that makes weapons feel real. It's so incredibly satisfying acquainting yourself with how a weapon works and quick reloading it in the middle of an intense firefight. It's active, a game within a game, and reloading weapons incorrectly will stop them from firing. The two teams' separate collection of weapons and equipment have always lent Onward a bit of asymmetry, and a big part of this is actually how weapons sound. From whether or not the shot you heard was hostile to what kind of weapon it was and what that means the enemy is trying to do, learning the distinct sounds weapons make and which team those weapons belong to will drastically improve your situational awareness and decision making.
Can you give a direction on by the compass?
Yeah, I gotta turn my night vision off though.
Yeah, right.
315.
315. Got it. Oh yeah, I hear him.
I think he's in that building or behind it. I can't tell.
He might be at the sandbags behind it. And that's definitely a bolt action.
Oh. Yeah, that's M40 for sure.
This is also where suppressors really become useful. They make your weapons quieter for sure, but not to the point of being completely silent. Unless the shooter is far away, you'll still be able to hear and locate suppressed weapons. Instead, what makes suppressors most useful is that they mask the distinct sound of your weapon. The more suppressors in a match, the more teams will have to communicate in order to figure out which shots are hostile and which are friendly. It's definitely a two-way street, but extremely useful for teams that are effectively communicating. Onward's excellent audio goes beyond just weapon weapons, it affects all kinds of facets of the gameplay. Sprinting will give away your position, as will the well-made voice proximity if you're talking too loudly. Some maps have continuous thunderstorms, providing great opportunities for audio cover if you need it. All of this was true when I made my original video, but through new equipment and a fantastic new game mode, Onward has added new and improved layers to firefights. With recently added gear like drones and RPGs, Downpour Interactive's turned the two teams' asymmetry away from being only separate arsenals and towards substantial differences in playstyle and tactics as well. Drones, for instance, allow Marsoc to safely recon the battlefield, and the Volk's RPG can clear buildings from afar. These items do come with important drawbacks. To control the drone, you have to use your tablet, giving a Marsoc player an active job and making them defenseless while they control it. This means Marsoc must either operate one member short or somehow protect the drone operator as they move, which is possible but impractical. The drone is also very loud, so Volk instantly know if Marsoc deploy it and can quickly locate it to shoot it down. As a team, Volk can only equip so many RPGs per round, and in loadouts, RPGs also take the place of main weapons. Equip an RPG and you'll be limited to a sidearm for self-defense, barring you find any dropped weapons laying around. Thus, like the drone occupies one Marsoc player, the RPG reduces one Volk member down to a sidearm, severely hindering their effectiveness in combat, and once the RPG carrier fires their rocket, hit or miss, Marsoc know Volk have a player limited to a pistol. I will say that at times it can feel cheap dying from an RPG that was launched in your direction based on a wish and guess, and I do think the weapon needs a little more weight than it already has. You can really reach out and touch someone without having to compensate a whole lot for drop. Some comprehensive, in-depth research suggests modern RPGs are accurate at a range of 900 to 1200 meters, so maybe this is realistic, but even if that's the case, I'd still prefer it if they were a bit harder to aim. All equipment costs points, and multiplayer loadouts are limited to 9 points. It's a system you're probably familiar with. Equipping better gear means you have fewer points to spend elsewhere. Most everything, from weapons to specialized gear like drones and RPGs, are tied to one of Onward's 4 classes: Rifleman, Specialist, Support, and Marksman, all of which have roles to fill and an assortment of class-specific equipment that leads to a surprisingly diverse, deep, and customizable set of playstyles. Marsoc Specialists, for example, have a grenade launcher that attaches to the MK18, giving specialists the choice between a long-range explosive launcher or the more support-oriented smoke grenade launcher. Likewise, both Volk and Marsoc Marksman are the only class with access to powerful bolt-action sniper rifles, weapons great for hitting targets at range, but not exactly great for clearing buildings. Marksmen can also equip shorter range rifles like the M16A4 or G3, giving them more aggressive close-quarter alternatives if they'd rather stick closer to their team. Then there's gear like bipods, available for both support and marksmen, that'll drastically improve weapon stability at the cost of nearly nixing mobility altogether. Part of developing a playstyle and building your loadouts is learning Onward's maps, which, despite everything else that's impressive about this game, still stands out to me as its best feature. No two maps in Onward are the same. They all branch off one another, remixes with varying speeds and tones, emphasizing different tactics and staying solidly committed to Onward's milsim-paced description. Suburbia is a close-quarters maze of penetratable cover and lots of color. There are places that'll make you stand out, as well as bushes and shadowed porches that'll better conceal you. Cargo takes Suburbia's maze, condenses it, and puts a darker, much less colorful shade on the whole map. Explosions and gunfire echo off metal walls and shipping containers. Much of the cover is blocky and square, meaning there are fewer odd clustered angles like you'd find in Suburbia. Because both maps are so small, contact happens extremely fast, and firefights seldom last more than a minute. On the opposite side of the spectrum, we have Abandoned, a large coniferous forest, thick of vegetation and trees rolling over wavy hills, an occasional rundown base breaking the saturated woods. Here, there's a slow, anxious buildup to combat, a combat that, because of the map's size and dense foliage, is often longer sustained. Snow Peak, Onward's newest map, borrows Abandoned's size and rolling hills, but removes much of the greenery. Bright white snow silhouettes you, with half the map made up of narrow canyons and a compact tunnel system, and the other a wide frozen lake flanked by 2 military bases. The area around the bases and lake has much longer sightlines than anywhere else on the map, and even includes watchtowers that that provide better views of the entire area. Onward's 3 core multiplayer modes, as Downpour Interactive calls them, fit into these maps perfectly, and, like loadouts, are all similar to modes you've probably played in other games. In Escort, Marsoc protect and must transport a player-controlled VIP to one of 2 extraction points, while Volk attempt to stop them. And in Uplink, Volk defend a satellite dish, while Marsoc attempt to get near it and put in a code on their tablet to win. Both modes have short time limits and no respawns, meaning firefights, while dependent on map, are usually brief and have long-lasting effects on the rest of the match for both winners and losers. Uplink Assault, Onward's newest mode, is a phenomenal combination of the 2 other modes that includes respawns and a much longer time limit. Just like Uplink, Volk with infinite respawns must defend a satellite dish, and Marsoc, with 20 shared respawns, need to get near it and input a code. But rather than a VIP, Marsoc have a fire team leader that acts as a mobile spawn point. The brilliance here is that Uplink Assault maintains Onward's slow, realistic pace, but makes firefights prolonged and allows for both teams to experiment with vastly different tactics over the course of a single round. Maybe as Marsoc, you deploy a sniper to provide overwatch as your team slowly advances on the objective. If that doesn't work, perhaps your team regroups and attempts a direct assault up the middle of the battlefield. Volk, meanwhile, have to react and continuously shift defensive positions, leave a flank unprotected, and Marsoc may eventually find their way in. Lengthy respawn timers mean calling out eliminations is just as important as it is in the other modes. If Marsoc down 3 or 4 Volk, it could mean the objective is weakly guarded, and if Volk down 3 or 4 Marsoc or eliminate the fire team leader, whose white shirt makes an easily identifiable target, it gives them time to regroup and reposition. Another important wrinkle is that if Marsoc do manage to put in the code, they don't automatically win. Instead, a countdown timer starts, and Volk have 60 seconds to cancel the uplink the same way Marsoc send it. It's a frantic and really intense ending, as Marsoc must switch from attacking to defending, while Volk have no choice but to charge the objective. Uplink Assault's longer duration also means ammo conservation becomes a much larger element. Very rarely do I completely run out of ammo mid-match while playing Onward's 2 older modes. Those modes are generally shorter, so I tend to be more liberal with the shots I take and the mags I dispose of. In Uplink Assault, however, the only way to get more ammo is to scavenge for it or respawn. This means, especially when defending as Volk, I become much more conservative with ammo, firing only when I have good shots and holding onto mags that may only contain a few more rounds. It's an excellent mode, but there are a few structural tweaks I'd like to see made. Rather than keeping maps open, Uplink Assault sets boundaries for both teams to deter spawn killing and keep Volk from roaming too far from the objective. These boundaries are definitely necessary for the mode, but there's no way to see exactly where these boundaries are without running into them, and when you do, your screen is suddenly blocked. The boundaries occasionally bend and curve and aren't always placed in tandem with the map's layout, making it really hard to predict where you can and can't go. It would better suit Uplink Assault if I could look at the map to see where the boundaries are and what shape they take. Constantly repositioning at a boundary that moves against the map's layout is at times tedious. With all that said, Uplink Assault still works. It's a challenging multiplayer experience and tons of fun, but most importantly, it doesn't stray away from Onward's commitment to simulation and realism. Downpour Interactive also recently added a social playlist with more casual, laid-back modes that changes every 2 weeks, and I don't have a problem with this at all. The core experience is still that of a realistic shooter, and an optional fun mode doesn't detract from that. And the same could be said for Onward's co-op section too. The variety of Onward's maps and the lengths it goes to ensure teamwork is imperative isn't only important for gameplay, but it's also essential to Onward's essence. Maps like Suburbia and Cargo are easy to learn, especially for newer players, and very player-friendly, but with larger, more complex maps like Abandoned and Snowpeak, Downpour Interactive remains committed to developing a true simulator experience that demands your attention and demands your effort. That's perhaps what I find most appealing about Onward. It's a great game, expertly crafted and enjoyable to learn, and that formula of simulation and hyper-realism isn't one you'd expect to appeal to the masses. And I'd guess Downpour Interactive is fine with that, and due to being fine with it, it's entered a very niche-y and rigid subgenre besides already being in a small VR market, and is creating a genre-defining game.